Valentine's Day usually starts in a very familiar way. A goodbye kiss at the door, a candle-lit dinner, a proposal that makes the table next to you go quiet, then start clapping. But in some parts of the world, those very romantic moments can end with a police report. Valentine suddenly turns into paperwork. A date turns into a legal issue. And the only thought you manage to have is, wait, I'm in love. What did I even do, love, is called freedom. The law, however, has a different opinion. These are 31 stories. They're real. They sound made up. And the first one will make you ask, wait, that's illegal. Story 1. Saying no to a proposal and getting a mandatory bill. On Valentine's Day, the entire restaurant goes quiet as he drops to one knee. Candlelight flickers. Red roses glow. The ring shines so brightly it could reflect the expectations of both families. There's just one small problem. She doesn't want to get married. In most places, this story would end with an awkward smile dessert eaten out of obligation and the familiar line, "Let's talk about this later." But in some parts of the world, saying no at this very special moment doesn't just hurt feelings. It can also brush up against the law. According to an old tradition, rejecting a proposal on that rare day can require compensation. Not in the form of an apology, but with money gifts or items expensive enough to hide the fact that one hand is still ringless. Love in this moment stops being an emotion. It becomes a transaction. And the word no, which you'd think is free, suddenly comes with a very clear price tag. Story 2. A kiss on the platform and the crime of delaying a train. In movies, this scene is always perfect. Two people standing on a train platform. A light breeze. The train about to depart. A goodbye kiss that lasts just long enough to scream, "If we don't kiss now, we'll regret this forever." But in real life, in some places, that romantic moment is treated as an administrative problem. Not because it's inappropriate, not because of public morals, but because it delays the train. Under old laws, overly passionate farewells on train platforms were once seen as a cause of passengers' hesitating staff being forced to wait and transportation schedules falling apart. When a train runs late, the authorities don't care how deep your love is. To the law, this isn't a cinematic moment. It's obstruction of a public service. So in the classic showdown between love and departure times, Hollywood might win on screen. But in real life, the schedule always wins. Story 3. When Valentine's Day is banned and love has to stay low-key. In many places, Valentine's Day means roses, chocolate, and couples holding hands in public with that very clear look of yes, we're in love. But in some countries, February 14th was once just another ordinary day. No flowers, no cards, no pink advertisements anywhere. Not because people hate love, but because the authorities don't like public displays of affection. Under certain regulations, celebrating Valentine's Day in public spaces could be banned for being seen as incompatible with social values. That means you can still love someone, but it's best to do it indoors. A bouquet of flowers can become a problem. A public date can attract unwanted attention. And a day meant for showing affection turns into a day where you pretend nothing special is happening. Valentine's Day still exists. It's just celebrated more quietly. And love this time has to learn how to take the long way around. Story 4. Kissing in public and a one-way ticket home. You're traveling for Valentine's Day and everything feels perfect. Great weather. Flawless check-in photos. A romantic mood straight out of a dream vacation. Then you hug your partner on the street. Or give a quick kiss. Nothing dramatic. Just normal. In some countries, that exact moment isn't seen as cute. It can be considered a violation of public decency. And the consequence isn't a few uncomfortable stares from passers-by, it's the police. Depending on the situation, you could get a warning, a fine, temporary detention, or even deportation. Love doesn't have a nationality, but laws definitely do. This is the kind of culture shock that never shows up in travel guides. No one warns you that a hug could end your trip earlier than planned. Valentine's Day is supposed to be a sweet memory, but sometimes it turns into a lesson about loving in the right place. Story 5. Kissing in the car, getting a ticket instead of flowers. Valentine's Day. Two people sitting in a car, music playing just romantic enough, streetlights washing over the windows, making it feel like a low-budget romance movie with way more emotion than money. A quick kiss, very light, perfectly on script. And then, real life shows up. In some places, kissing while a car is stopped or even moving can be considered distracted driving. Traffic laws don't care that it's Valentine's Day. They don't care how long you've been in love. They care about one very cold question. Are you operating the vehicle safely? So the romantic date turns into a document check. The flowers never get handed over. The chocolate starts melting, and your Valentine's memory gets preserved on a thin piece of paper with an amount you have to pay. In movies, a kiss in the car always ends with soft background music. In real life, it usually ends with the sound of a pen signing a ticket. Story 6. An overly enthusiastic honeymoon and the crime of being too loud. A honeymoon is always described as the most romantic time of your life. A nice hotel, a room with a view, and two people finally relaxing after an exhausting wedding. There's just one small detail everyone forgets. Neighbors still exist. In some places, noise coming from a hotel room isn't classified as happiness, romance, or a beautiful memory. To the law, it all falls under one very dry label: disturbance of public order. So instead of calling the front desk to ask for extra towels, you might get a knock on the door at midnight, not carrying champagne, but delivering a very polite, very sober reminder about quiet hours. A honeymoon is still a honeymoon. It's just that love apparently also has a permitted volume level. And once you go past it, the law is the first to ask you to turn it down. Story 7. A private picnic and a very public problem. Valentine's Day doesn't always need a crowded restaurant. Sometimes all you need is a blanket, some takeout food, and a quiet corner peaceful enough for two people to pretend the world has lost its Wi-Fi connection. Sounds harmless, very romantic, and in some places, very suspicious. In certain countries, two unmarried people being together in a secluded place can be seen as a violation of moral codes or public order. You don't even have to do anything. Being too private is already the problem. So that dreamy Valentine picnic can end with a warning, public shaming, or an invitation to come talk with authorities. The law doesn't care whether you're eating sandwiches or discussing your future. The lesson is pretty simple. Loving in crowded places can be exhausting, but loving somewhere too quiet can be even more exhausting. Story 8. A Valentine hotel and the deadly question, are you married? Valentine's Day. Two people walk into a hotel feeling completely normal. No rose petals on the floor, no presidential suite, just a simple night away for two people in love. Everything is fine until the front desk smiles and asks a question that sounds harmless enough. Are you married? In many places, that's just small talk. But in some countries, your answer can decide whether you get a room at all, and whether things turn into a legal issue. Telling the truth doesn't work. Lying is even worse, and vague answers usually make everything spiral. So a Valentine's night that should have involved movies, food, and a big "Do Not Disturb" sign suddenly turns into a high-pressure communication test. A bit of harmless role-playing becomes risky, all because of one very polite question. Story 9. You never got married, but the law did it for you. Two people live together comfortably. No wedding, no marriage license, no big family ceremony. Just love sharing an apartment, splitting the rent, and occasionally arguing about who forgot to take out the trash. Everything is fine until they break up. That's when the law steps in very calmly and says hello. According to our records, you two are married. In some places, living together long enough means your relationship is legally considered a marriage. No wedding ceremony, but still responsibilities. No wedding photos, but still assets to divide. You don't remember ever saying "I do." But the law remembers exactly how long you lived there, how the utilities were paid, and who bought the couch. So when the breakup happens, you realize something mildly shocking: you never married anyone. But the law married you on your behalf without you even noticing. Story 10. Living together for 2 years, suddenly married. You think marriage requires paperwork, signatures, and at least one judgmental relative as a witness. But in some places, the law has a much simpler requirement time. Two people live together, split the rent, share a Netflix account, and accidentally memorize each other's morning routines. Then one day the government looks at the situation and casually says, you two are married now. No one asks if you agree. No rings, no wedding photos. Just records showing 2 years at the same address and a very consistent electricity bill history. So a relationship you thought was seriously getting to know each other suddenly comes with legal status rights and responsibilities attached. You don't remember ever saying I do, but the law remembers exactly how long you lived together. Turns out in this place, loving someone for too long can accidentally turn into marriage. Story 11. If you want to get married, the whole town has to know. You think getting married is a private matter. 2 people fall in love, say yes, pick a nice date, done. But in some places the law says hold on. The entire town needs to hear about this. Before the ceremony, you're legally required to publicly announce the wedding. In newspapers, on bulletin boards at City Hall, basically sending an invitation to anyone who might want to object. The purpose sounds very serious. If someone has a legitimate reason to stop the marriage, this is their final chance. But in practice, it feels like you just opened the comments section on one of the biggest decisions of your life. An old neighbor, a past relationship, or a secret you thought was buried for good. A wedding goes from a private moment to a public announcement with a response deadline. Here, being in love isn't enough. You also have to survive the round of does anyone have a problem with this before you're allowed to say your vows. Story 12. Get married in a church first, and you might be married the wrong way. For many couples, the church wedding is the moment that feels truly official. Candlelight, hymns, sacred vows, paperwork that can wait. But in some places, the law isn't nearly that romantic. By regulation, the civil marriage has to come first. If you do it the other way around, the most sacred ceremony of your life can be considered legally out of order. Worse, the person officiating could even face trouble for giving a blessing before the state approves it. So a very awkward situation appears. God has witnessed it. Family has applauded. Friends have cried happy tears. But the government still hasn't found your name in the system. To the law, love needs a signature before it gets blessed. Faith belongs to the heart. Paperwork belongs to the records. And sometimes to get married legally, you have to stop by City Hall before you ever walk into a church. Story 13. A wedding on a deadline, miss the time and it's over. You think getting married just requires the right person, the right day, and a bit of luck with the weather. But there was a time when the law cared about one very specific detail, the hour of the day. Under old regulations, weddings were only allowed during daylight hours. Not because it was more romantic, but to prevent secret ceremonies at midnight when no one could step in to stop them. So every wedding turned into a race against the clock. If the ceremony dragged on too long, if the priest talked a bit too much, or if someone cried a little too hard, the sun went down and that was it. Running late meant the marriage was invalid. No wedding, no paperwork, just a great party and a relationship that was still legally exactly the same as before. Love may be eternal, but under the law back then it was only legal if you beat sunset. Story 14. No money, no marriage. 2 people love each other, genuinely, but their wallets are also very real. In some places in history, love alone wasn't enough. Before getting married, you had to prove you owned property, had a stable job, and posed no risk of becoming a burden on society. In other words, the state wanted to see your financial statement before approving your happiness. It didn't matter how long you'd been in love. It didn't matter how intense that look in your eyes was. If your income didn't meet the standard, the answer was simple: not allowed to marry. Marriage in this case wasn't a story about emotions. It was more like a personal finance exam. Pass and you get married. Fail and you go back to being just a couple. Romance lost to numbers. And love for the first time had to stand behind the rent bill. Here, loving enough doesn't matter. What matters is whether you have enough money. Story 15. The wrong wedding ring, no ceremony. A wedding ring is usually seen as a symbol, a small circle that says I choose this person and I'm serious about it. But there was a time when the law looked at the ring and asked a very unromantic question. What is it made of? Under old regulations in some places, wedding rings had to be made of precious metal, most commonly gold. Not because it looked better, but because gold proved you were financially capable of entering marriage. If you were poor and used a ring made of iron, copper, or something more budget-friendly, the church could outright refuse to perform the ceremony. No ring that met the standard, no wedding. No matter how strong the love was, it couldn't make up for the wrong material. So marriage turned into a metal test, not measuring emotion, not measuring commitment, just measuring how precious the ring was. Here, love doesn't live in the heart. It lives on your finger, and it has to be heavy enough to count. Story 16. When the law gives your mom veto power over your love. You think once you're grown, choosing who you love is your decision. Parents can give opinions, complain, or sigh very dramatically, but the final call is yours. At least, that's how it works now. In some periods of history, the law had a very different opinion. If your parents didn't approve, your marriage could be legally delayed. Not for a few weeks, for years. You love them. They love you. You're both ready to get married. But the law asks one very simple question. What does your mother think? And if the answer is no, you might be sent back to being just a couple for a very long time just to prove you've asked for permission enough times. Love at this point isn't a conversation between two people. It's a family meeting with minutes taken. Here your heart is allowed to speak. But the final signature belongs to your parents. Story 17. Getting married and divorced again until the fourth time the law says stop. Some couples love each other in a very persistent way. Marry, divorce, get back together, then marry again. Like an on and off relationship, just with extra government paperwork attached. In most places, the law just watches from the sidelines and quietly sighs. But in some places, the authorities eventually step in. The law states that you can't marry the same person too many times. 3 times might be bad luck or unfinished business. But by the 4th time, the state starts questioning your decision-making skills. At that point, love is no longer an emotional story. It becomes an administrative issue. Something like, we've issued these documents for you too enough times already. Not every love gets unlimited retries. And when the law says, that's enough, that's when you realize even second chances have legal limits. Story 18. The engagement ring is a deposit. Cancel the wedding and you pay it back. An engagement ring is usually given in a very emotional moment. There might be tears. Someone might be recording. And there's almost always the line, I promise. But under the law in some places, that ring isn't a memory. It's a deposit. Legally, an engagement ring is considered a conditional gift. The condition is that the couple gets married. If the wedding doesn't happen for any reason, the ring usually has to be returned. It doesn't matter who called off the wedding. It doesn't matter who's more heartbroken. The law doesn't handle emotions. It handles property. So when the relationship ends, the question is no longer do we still love each other, but where is the ring? Feelings can be complicated. But to the law, things are coldly simple. No wedding, no deposit kept. Story 19. Divorcing by text message in 2 parallel worlds. In the age of texting, people break up with emojis, end relationships with a scene, and sometimes get divorced with a single message. In some places, sending a very short message using the exact required wording is enough for a marriage to be considered over on a spiritual or religious level. No meeting, no arguments, just a stable phone signal. The problem is, the government doesn't read that message. Legally, the 2 people are still fully married, still sharing responsibilities, still bound by obligations, and still required to file a mountain of paperwork to officially separate. So a very strange situation appears. Emotionally, the marriage is over. On paper, it's still legally intact. A marriage existing in 2 parallel worlds, one where it ended with a text message, and another that only accepts an ending with an official stamp. Story 20. When cheating was a criminal offense. Today, cheating is usually handled with arguments, long silences, or one very tense conversation in the living room. But there was a time when it was handled far more seriously through criminal law. In some places, adultery wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a crime. Something that could be investigated, prosecuted, and even punished with prison time. At that point, a private matter no longer stayed within the family. It went straight to court complete with witnesses, case files, and carefully collected evidence. Things that should have stayed in the bedroom suddenly became legal documents. The law doesn't ask whether you still love each other. It only asks one thing: did this act occur? Personal feelings get turned into a legal case. Cheating shifts from an emotional mistake into a line written inside a criminal record. Turns out sometimes a broken heart isn't even the most serious consequence. Story 21. Abandon your wife, lose your inheritance. Some people think leaving a family is just moving houses and changing phone numbers. Fall in love with someone else, start a new life, and believe the past has been neatly packed away somewhere far out of sight. But the law doesn't have a short memory like that. In some places, if a husband abandons his wife and openly lives with someone else, that action doesn't simply disappear over time. Even if the wife later passes away, the law remembers exactly who did what and when. The consequence is surprisingly cold. The husband can lose all inheritance rights. No property, no share. No, but I'm still the legal husband. The law treats abandonment not just as an emotional issue, but as a failure of responsibility that follows you to the very end. You can leave. You can build a new life. But in the eyes of the law, once you walk away halfway through, don't expect to receive the full ending. Story 22. Suing the third party for stealing your love. When a marriage falls apart, most people think of arguments, lawyers, and dividing up belongings. But in some places, the law gives you an extra very dramatic option: suing the third party. Under old rules, if you believed an outsider destroyed your marriage, you could take them to court. You didn't have to prove a specific romantic affair. You just had to show that love disappeared from your home after they appeared. Love in this case is treated like a form of property, and the third party is considered to have stolen it. So a breakup that's already exhausting suddenly turns into a high-drama civil lawsuit, with potential compensation reaching into the millions. The law doesn't ask who still loves whom. It asks who caused this affection to disappear. Here, a broken heart isn't the end. It's just the opening scene of a courtroom battle. Story 23. A marriage with an expiration date. Today, people talk about trial dating, living together first, and getting to know each other seriously. But in some cultures in the past, even marriage came with a trial version. Two people could get married for a clearly defined period of time. 1 year, a few years, or so precise it even listed an exact expiration date. During that time, they lived together as a legally recognized couple. No secrecy, no complications, and most importantly, no need to think about divorce. When the time was up, everything was simple. If they wanted to continue, they renewed the contract. If not, each went their own way, no lawyers, no arguments. It sounds very modern, but also very cold. Marriage at that point wasn't a lifelong vow. It was more like a service plan with a fixed duration. And the big question was no longer do we love each other, but is this contract worth renewing? Story 24. To get rid of bad luck, you have to marry a tree. First, you love someone. You want to marry them. Everything is fine. Until someone says, wait, you bring bad luck. In some places, if you were believed to carry misfortune in marriage, you weren't allowed to marry a real person right away. The solution sounded very scientific, Mary. A tree first. Yes, a tree. Or sometimes a symbolic object, like a pot, a statue, or a wooden post. A full ceremony. Serious photos. Once it's done, that spouse is considered to have absorbed all the bad luck. After that, you're allowed to marry the person you love as normal. No curse, no bad omen. Everything has been handled by vegetation. It sounds like a joke. But this ritual was once accepted by both society and the law. Here, love doesn't just need emotions. It also needs a tree willing to sacrifice itself for your happiness. Story 25. Marrying someone who has passed away sounds like a movie, but it's real. It sounds like a very sad romantic movie that airs at midnight. But no, this isn't a Hollywood script. In some places, you can actually marry someone who has already died. The conditions are both emotional and extremely administrative. You have to prove that the two of you truly loved each other, and that the other person intended to marry you before they passed away. There's no honeymoon, no big wedding reception. But there is still a ceremony, paperwork, and approval from very high-level authorities. Love in this case crosses even the boundary between life and death. But the law keeps a cool head. This marriage doesn't grant property or financial benefits, it grants a status. An official way to say we didn't get the chance to marry, but we belong to each other. Romantic, yes, strange, very, but completely real. Story 26. A wedding without the bride and groom. You'd think that to get married at the very least, the two people would have to show up. Look at each other, nod. Say I do in front of a crowd of photo-loving witnesses. But in some places, the law says no need. Send a representative. This is known as a proxy marriage. The bride and groom can be on different continents. They might have never even stood in the same room together. As long as the paperwork is valid and representatives sign on their behalf, the marriage is legally recognized. No exchange glances, no ceremonial kiss. Just signatures and stamps working very hard. Love, if it exists, doesn't appear at the ceremony, but the law is fully present. When everything is finalized, the two people are officially married, even if they've never cut a wedding cake together. Here, marriage isn't a moment. It's an administrative procedure handled efficiently. Story 27. Just married. Then one of you joins a religious order. The wedding just ended. The cake isn't even finished. The photos are still waiting to be edited. Then one of you calmly says, I think I'm more suited for religious life. In some places, this isn't just an emotional shock. The law treats entering religious life immediately after marriage as a fundamental change to the marriage itself. Like signing a full-time contract, then quitting the next day to go live in seclusion. The result is very decisive. The marriage can be completely annulled. Not a divorce, but treated as if it never existed. The law doesn't argue about who's right or wrong. It just looks at the reality one person has chosen a path that leaves no room for married life. A new calling takes priority. An old commitment gets set aside. And just like that, some marriages end so quickly the honeymoon doesn't even get a chance to begin. Story 28. A love interview before you're allowed to marry. You think getting married just requires loving each other enough. But in some places, before you can say I do, you have to pass an interview. The government doesn't ask when you fell in love. It asks very specific questions: what your partner likes to eat, their morning habits, where you first met. The kind of details only people who truly live together can answer smoothly. The goal sounds reasonable, preventing sham marriages. But the experience feels like an oral exam on your own private life. The two of you are interviewed separately. If your answers don't match closely enough, your marriage application can be denied. Not because you don't love each other, but because your love didn't match the answer key. At this point, love isn't proven through looks or feelings. It's proven through memory and consistency. Here, marriage doesn't begin with vows. It begins with a very serious administrative test. Story 29. Love according to the state's plan. There was a time when love wasn't just a matter between two people. It was part of a larger social development plan. The law laid it out very clearly what age you should get married, at what stage of life, and for what purpose. Love too early was seen as impulsive. Love too late was considered socially unproductive. It sounds like relationship advice, but it was actually policy. Under this mindset, marriage wasn't about personal happiness. It was a tool to produce suitable citizens, stable families, and an easier society to manage. Emotions were allowed as long as they followed the plan. You could love, but who you loved, when you loved, and when you married were all expected to stay within approved boundaries. Here, love wasn't something the heart led you into. It was a line item in a long-term plan, and if your feelings drifted off schedule, the law would be the one reminding you to get back on time. Story 30. Marriage as a 366-day free trial. Today, before buying software, people like to try it first. But there was a time when society went even further. It offered a trial version of marriage. Two people could get married for exactly 1 year and 1 day. Not a mistake, not temporary confusion, a clearly defined rule. During that period, the couple lived together fully legally, shared a home, shared responsibilities, shared everything, except a lifetime promise. When the time ran out, there was no need for divorce, no lawyers, no arguments about who was wrong. You simply returned to the place where you got married and decided to renew or walk away. Love at this point wasn't judged by feelings. It was judged by performance. If it worked, you signed again. If it didn't, You ended it cleanly. Marriage in this case was like a free trial with very clear terms, 366 days to decide whether it was worth committing long term. Story 31. Getting married. Then realizing the law requires you to split the chores. The wedding goes perfectly. The photos are glowing. The vows are emotional. Two people promise to build a life together straight out of a romance movie. Then real life begins. Dishes don't wash themselves. Clothes don't fold themselves. And love doesn't automatically divide the housework. In Spain, modern marriage law takes this more seriously than you might think. If one partner consistently refuses to share household chores, childcare, or support the other, it's not just irresponsibility. It can be considered a violation of marital duties. The interesting part comes during divorce. Lines like "you never did the dishes" are no longer just complaints. They can become real legal disadvantages. The law doesn't ask how much you loved each other. It asks what you actually did for your shared life. Here, love doesn't live only in the vows. It lives in the sink, the washing machine, and the daily to-do list. Looking back at the 31 stories we've just heard, one thing becomes pretty clear. Love isn't just about feelings, glances, or romantic vows. Sometimes it's also about laws clauses and very small fine print that nobody ever reads carefully. You can love with your whole heart, but the law doesn't care how strongly you feel. It only cares about where you love when you love and whether you're doing it by the rules. Now it's your turn. If you got to write the laws of love, what would be the first thing you'd ban? Leave a comment and share your idea. Like if at least one story made you think, wait, that's actually a law, and subscribe if you enjoy stories that are funny and uncomfortably real. Because sometimes loving the wrong person isn't as dangerous as loving in the wrong place.